Hey guys, just to let you know that Borderlands and the last ones are on Tubi right now. That's Tubi. It's a streaming service. You probably have it on your PlayStation or on your phone. Check it out. The last ones is a zombie drama. It's in black and white. The first black and white zombie movie, I think it is. I'm not gonna check though, or you know. And also, Borderland is a mexploitation film about the cartels, and it's a lot of fun. And if you're like, hey, I want to learn about how El Paso is. Well, don't watch my film because it's not like how it is at all. But if you want to watch a fun movie set in El Paso, check it out. It's a lot of fun. Borderland and the last ones on Tubi. Check them out now. And now, let's start with the show. It's Andrew Hada. You just heard me talk about my movies. They're on Tubi. But we're going to blow right past that because we have an important movie today. Well, it's important in how awesome it is. And we're going to talk about it. So we're going to get right into it. This movie is called Darkman. Now, Darkman is directed by Sam Raimi. It stars our favorite actor of all time, Liam Neeson. Is this the first Liam Neeson movie we've done, Josh?
May no, he was in Excalibur, right?
Oh yes, he was in Excalibur. It also has Bruce Campbell because it was directed by Sam Raimi. It came out in 1990, and it's one of the if it's not the best action superhero movie of all time, it is one of the best. And it's funny that this is our first superhero movie that we're doing because it's not based on anything. It's based on Sam Raimi not being able to do the Shadow.
Yeah, or Batman. Yeah,
Yeah, because Sam Raimi wanted to do the Shadow or Batman, and he was unable to secure the rights, so he just like made this movie for Universal. It was his first studio film. He wrote it with his brother Ivan, his normal producer Robert Tappert. Yeah, he wanted it to star Bruce Campbell, but Hollywood was like, "Stop trying to make Bruce happen," and they didn't let him. So he got Liam Neeson, which was a great addition. And then and it's become a classic. It has two sequels that we're not going to talk about because I've seen them. I don't remember anything about them. Um, but Josh, give us a description of what this movie's about.
a scientist gets his face melted off by criminals, and then he has to strike out and take revenge against them while also protecting his girlfriend, Frances McDormand.
Yeah, Liam Neeson plays. He's like a scientist, and his whole job is trying to
His
recreate like skin for
his name
uh,
is Peyton Westlake,
Peyton.
which is such a
Yeah,
good like comic book name.
I know it is. And so like they're creating skin for burn victims that they can just wear, and they're having a problem where it doesn't last past 99 minutes. And so then they find out that it does last past 99 minutes if you're in the dark, and that
Right.
literally never comes up.
It briefly,
But we'll
kind
talk
of,
about
not really. Well, and it's kind of like it has that kind of like it's like this criminal, and then there's like a CEO who's like trying to do a land deal. It's very like RoboCop esque in that way.
yeah, don't you miss the days where CEOs were the bad guys and not the Iron Mans? Yeah, like because there's like this guy and his girlfriend's played by Frances McDormand. She's like a lawyer and she's helping them facilitate this deal to build like a new development property. And she finds out that they've been bribing people, so she confronts her boss, and her boss is like, "Yeah, I have been bribing people." And he says, "Give me the piece of paper." And she's like, "Oh, my husband accidentally took it to work." And so they steal the paper back and they blow up his
They burn
thing.
down his lab. They burn his. Yeah, he's in a coma for like a couple weeks or something. You don't know how
Yeah,
much time has passed,
and
but
so and he's like woke or like because he's so badly burned, they've cut out all his they cut out his pain receptors so he can't feel pain, but one of the side effects is that he's super strong and also he goes into psychotic breaks.
yeah, they describe it as like super emotions, which is funny because it's clearly just like, oh, how do we get the Sam Raimi style of like visuals, And it's like,
Yeah,
oh, he just
I do like
freaks
that
out and sees them.
Ash Williams from the Evil Dead franchise also has this power, but they just explained it as him being Ash. But yeah, so he can't feel pain. He's super strong. He has that psychotic breaks, and then he escapes and he goes for revenge and to try to get Julie back. his girlfriend. And so yeah, that's the basic plot, and we wanted to get it out of the way because we want to talk about this movie. Josh
As
is
I was watching this, what's interesting because the big thing with superhero movies for like what 15, 20 years was like you can't do an R-rated one, and this movie is so R-rated, and then Blade was too, and then they just kind of ignored that. We're like, nope, you can't do an R-rated superhero movie.
yeah, well, and it's crazy. Like this is what movies should be like, especially like Marvel movies or action movies. A scene with the main bad guy played by Robert Durant. Or no, he's not played by Robert Durant. His name is Robert Durant. And they're at the docks and they're meeting with another gangster. And it's Larry Drake who plays Robert Durant. And they're like, "Oh, we're going to meet with this gangster."
They bring them in, and then they're like take all their weapons, and they're pulling out
Oh,
like
yeah.
nunchucks and brass. It's like Spider-Man's goons, like
It's
basically.
literally, yeah, it's literally like that scene where they like have Wacko from the Animaniacs drop his bag and there's just a bunch of shit in there. Because it's not just like, oh, everyone has a gun. It's like guns and nunchucks and like brass knuckles. And so then they're like, okay, they're clear. And they like look at one of the guys and he has a wooden leg and they're like, "Oh, that's a wooden leg. He can definitely go." So they go, and then the guy, his name is Eddie Black. He's a rival crime boss, and he's like, "Oh, I have some points for you. You'll never take my land, and don't ever try to threaten me." So then Durant, like, so then you find out that the wooden leg is actually a machine gun, and they take it and like start killing all his men.
Yeah, they do the like, oh well, there's only five of us, but we're just gonna like shoot in a circle and kill everyone. It's very.
Yeah, and it works.
Oh yeah, of
And
course.
then, so Robert Durant loves to smoke cigars. And so he takes out a cigar and he like cuts off the end of it. And then he goes up to Eddie Black and he starts cutting off his fingers. And he's like,
I try not to let my anger get the better of me. 2. I don't always succeed. 3. I've got 7 more points.
and then it automatically zooms into the Darkman title. So you know what movie this is.
Perfect
Yeah.
first 5 minutes.
Yeah, and I think about like movies like this or even like Die Hard, and you see like where these big ensembles full of bad guys. I can do characteristics for all the bad guys. Yeah, it's just so funny. So then we get to the next scene, and it's just kind of like that's where we establish everything. We establish Liam Neeson, and it's funny because at the time Liam Neeson wasn't known as an action star, so this was like out of left field. And I know for a long time people were like, oh, I wish Liam Neeson would go back to making action films. And now that's like all he does, which is super funny and cool. You're reintroduced to Durant, and Peyton is introduced to him for the first time. And Durant's like, "Where's the memo?" And the shot is looking at Durant, and the implication is that Peyton has been punched against the wall. And then he picks himself up to answer Durant and falls back down. And it's such a good shot that it's like, oh yeah, Sam Raimi is really good at
Yeah,
cinematography. Like he knows how to like make shots dynamic, even if it's just one character talking to another.
they
And
have
also
like
every character in this movie talks like a fucking 1940s pulp detective.
Wanna book me? What is it about the dark? What secret does it hold?
Just fine.
He has his friend with him who's like the work study. And Payne's like, he's just a lab assistant. Let him breathe because they have like plastic over his face. And then Durant goes, "You heard him? Ventilate him." And then they shoot him in the head.
It's also worth noting that it's not. They don't just shoot him. Ted Raimi like pulls out like a golden inscripted pistol, and like it zooms in on it as he's like pointing it at him.
Yeah,
It's
it's
yeah, just for no like it's just one of those things.
just
There's
because it makes
just
it more interesting visually and
so much
audibly.
style.
Yeah, so they burn him and then they like kill everyone, and they like they for some reason. Okay, so Frances McDormand plays the girlfriend, and she tells the boss that I know you guys were bribing, and also Peyton has the paper, and then Peyton gets exploded, and that's right again real fast right when she gets there, she like exits a taxi and she looks as the place explodes, and then the camera transitions, and she's in the exact same spot to her in the black gown at the funeral. And it's literally like one of those like activity books where you have one set of clothes and then you put a
Yeah,
transition
and like
thing
the
to it.
overlay, and it doesn't. I should say, like, this doesn't even look that great. They almost should have done it, but I love like
Oh, it
that
looks
he did do
amazing.
it. Like,
Yeah.
because yeah, it's like they slowly. It's a slow fade transition from like her at this burning waterfront to her at the graveyard with like just to see like the black veil over her and stuff.
Yeah,
It's
and see, and that's one of the things I love about Sam Raimi is that, I mean, the honest truth is that it doesn't really matter what kind of special effects you have, unless you like manage to sneak out a Star Wars, and even sometimes not that. The effects are always gonna kind of look shittier as time goes
no,
on, as
yeah, and
everybody.
it's almost and there's a lot of like a lot of Darkman. There's like a big helicopter sequence where it's like, oh, you could tell this is like over green screen, but it's like, yeah, but I like that he went for it. Like it's
Yeah, and
like
I
it suits
yeah,
it,
and that's my point. Like, if the effects are gonna like look dated either way, and like, who cares about your movie looking dated? It's like
right?
it's a movie. It's not a fucking documentary. So I would much rather have like, oh, this thing kind of looks dated, but it's cool that he went like that's how he transitioned from her watching him die to the funeral to kind of keep the idea that she's still in shock all these weeks later. Then like, oh yeah, Spider-Man's head doesn't fit on his body anymore because
Well, I was gonna say it's almost like because now the problem when you watch a lot of modern, especially like a lot of modern superhero movies, where it's like it's weird how they cut corners with the CGI, but it's like, oh, this is so blurry. But it's like the kind of cheapo green screen stuff holds up a lot better, kind of in the way that like
yeah,
Super Nintendo holds up better than N64 now because it has a style to it, whereas the N64 is just like shitty 3D, you know. It's
yeah,
almost like
yeah.
that's the difference between the two. It's like you could see the style in this, but not necessarily like early CGI stuff, if that
Yeah,
makes
because
sense.
as we get out of like out as we look at outdated like effects, I would rather like seeing an outdated like stop motion effect of his hand turning into like a fucking monster hand. Like I would much rather see that because you see the skill involved. And don't get me wrong, of course there's a bunch of skill involved in CGI, but it's so alarming and it's so hard to like see past the bad CGI to the talent that was involved that it makes it so much, it stands out so much more. One
But
of the
yeah,
things that I really like, okay, so they have the doctor and she's like just essentially it's an exposition dump of her like explaining that Darkman no longer can feel pain. He's super strong and also he's kind of crazy. But like the way she does it, like she stabs him with like cuz it starts off and she's like, "Oh, like the homeless aren't taken care of until they're put into such disarray like this man because they think he's homeless." And it's so funny. Like it starts off by her being like super compassionate towards the homeless and saying we should do something before they end up in this state. But then she like stabs Darkman with a pen to prove that he can't feel pain.
I know that was
The
such a good
funniest thing
scene.
is watching this as a teen. I like had no problem with that. I was like, yeah, I mean that's what doctors need to do.
Well,
But
what's funny too is like because they almost have that the homeless commentary and the villain like being this evil CEO who's like I'm creating jobs. It's almost like man, this has like more like social commentary than like 10 of the last superhero movies I saw. You know what I
yeah,
mean?
and Darkman immediately escapes because of course he does. And
Right.
it's like it's such a good like it's raining and he finds like an immediate super long trench coat and a hat
Of course, yeah.
because it's a noir film immediately. And then he like again immediately he finds a hat, he finds a trench coat, and he's like, okay, time to go kill people. Even though I
Well,
was like a researcher who like wanted to help everyone.
yeah, he immediately starts going after them, and he targets the weakest of the group. Ted Raimi
Which
is
I love that. Like, if you know anything about the Raimis, you know they like to joke around with each other, and I love that Ted Raimi, like that Sam Raimi intentionally cast Ted Raimi as like the weak, like the weakest one who's new and doesn't know what to do.
the dork. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Okay, so
yeah.
but anyway, then it goes
Get
into
with
one
it.
of my favorite scenes because he immediately kidnaps Ted Raimi and he gets Ted Raimi to give him all the information. And this is again to show you the difference between this type of movie and like the discourse last week on Twitter was like, "Oh, Batman can't unintentionally kill anyone." So to see that, and then to see like
Yeah.
now, because he has Ted Raimi, and he has him underwater. He's kind of waterboarding him, and
He's
Ted Raimi's like
waterboarding him from a
sewer
sewer.
drain.
Like
Yeah,
he has him at like the ladder where you crawl into it, and he's waterboarding him against like a pipe, like holding him up
yeah.
against it. Yeah.
And Ted Raimi goes,
I told you everything!
I know, Rick. I know you did.
But let's pretend you didn't.
and he picks him up, and he lets him get run over by a bus.
Yeah, he holds him in place like a manhole until a truck hits him in the
Yeah,
face.
and I will say one of the best things about Ted Raimi is that he knows how to scream and how to make himself look very scared, and it works wonders in this film because that scene, like where he's bouncing up and down, just screaming, is so good.
And
So
then
this is a hero that we're dealing with. He will murder you, and even if you give him the
he
information,
does have a little pathos because he's like, "What if I become?" But he kind of acknowledges it and is like, "Well, I'm going to keep killing people. I mean, come on,
yeah,
that's
and
not going to change."
I think that's good, and we'll talk about how it ends by the end of it, obviously. But yeah, I like it immediately cuts to Darkman, and he's like in between two gargoyles because this movie is perfect, and he's like crying, and he's telling himself like, "Oh, what have I done? What have I become?" And it's like, yeah, Darkman is a dark hero. He's not. He's gonna murder. And so then he starts taking them all out and using. So he figures out again that he can wear the masks that he makes. If he takes pictures, he starts taking pictures of the crew so he can start wearing their masks. And he only has 99 minutes. And again, like at the beginning, they find out that in the dark, it'll last longer. And Darkman is named Darkman. And every time he wears someone else's mask, it's the brightest day in the world.
Yeah, it's one of those things where he's always like checking his timer because like yeah, right at 99 minutes it immediately starts to smoke and melt like his because he has
Yeah,
not just a mask for his face but also his hands. He has fake hands.
yeah.
And they all start to smoke and he'll be like checking it. It'll be like at 92 minutes he's like, all right, now time to go in this restaurant. It's like, you are out of time, Dark Man. You're cutting all this very close.
Might we add that Darkman has set himself up in like an abandoned factory, and that's where he's
Yeah,
like building
with a bunch of cats that are
with a bunch
like
of cat
he
and
starts feeding them
with a big fire in the middle that he's just using as lights.
like a kiln. Yeah, it's like
Yeah,
an abandoned factory. Yeah.
it's such a good.
It's like the end of RoboCop. Basically, he
Yeah,
lives
he lives
there.
there. So yeah, he starts taking them out one by one in different ways, and then like he because at the beginning he's trying to put his own face back together, but the picture that he tries to use doesn't work. So it's gonna take like 3 weeks or something to build
Yeah,
an actual
it's
mask. And so he's getting revenge on other people, and he's kind of turning the crew against each other. And we're not going to spoil it because we'll spoil it when we have to. But I highly recommend going to
yeah,
see
the
this
way
movie.
he does it, it actually, in a way, yeah, not to get into details, but it reminds me of like a smart take on the Punisher if he was trying to like
Hmm.
ruin lives, and it's almost like this is like a good example of how the Punisher should be, but
Yeah,
isn't.
I was never really a fan of like, oh, the Punisher just goes in and shoots everyone because A, that hardly ever is going to work, and B, it's just kind of boring and uninteresting. That's
Yeah.
why John Wick 2, where he uses more than one gun, is cooler. Um, so then
Mm.
he's like getting revenge, and then his face gets put together. But before that happens, is another one of the best scenes in the movie because he's like he like looks at himself in the mirror, and then he like realizes that his whole face is gone, and he's like starts crying. And then one of the cats hisses at him, and he's like, "Oh, you think I'm a freak? Is that what you think?" And then he like finds like an oil, like the thing that you put oil in your car, and he puts it on his head like a dunce, and he's like, "You see the dancing freak?" And he's like dancing for no real reason. The cat's like getting
Right.
more angry, and it's just kind of like I know a lot of people say like, "Oh, how could you like this movie couldn't get made nowadays?" And like, I don't know if that's true or not, but it is like to see how sterilized, like, and you don't even realize it, but Disney Marvel movies are so sterilized compared to like Blade or like Darkman, where it's like I don't see any Disney director or fucking like executive being like, yeah, keep in the scene where he freaks out at the cat and calls himself a freak for 30 seconds.
And he starts just like he grabs like a rod and just starts beating like
Like
random
destroying his own
furniture and
equipment.
yeah, like getting like pissed. And it's just yeah, like a Marvel movie, it would be like he would make like a sarcastic quip because they all just
And he
kind
would
of have that
cry.
same
Yeah.
personality. Yeah, it's
And
very
so he goes and
interesting.
meets Julie, and he tells her like that he has very intensive physical therapy, so he can only see her for 90 minutes at a time. Again, he never sees Julie at night.
He also goes like, "Hey Julie, like I mean hypothetically, what if my face was really bad?" She's like, "But it's not." He's like, "Yeah, but what if it was?"
It's like this isn't the way to do this, Darkman. This is not the way to do this at all. So they, and again, in one of the best scenes, which is how I've described every scene we've talked about so
I know there's so many like good
far.
scenes.
They're at a carnival, and like it's where he's trying to explain to her that he might be more damaged than she knows, and she doesn't really understand because he looks normal. Again, maybe that's a commentary on the way we treat mental illness. But he's like getting more and more angry because he knows the reality of his face and she doesn't. So she's kind of like, why are you asking me these kind of questions? Like, who cares? And he's like, oh, well, what if you thought I was a freak? And he's getting more mad. And he's like throwing a ball and he knocks down these pins. But the carnival guy doesn't want to give him like the stuffed pig, the pink elephant. And so he like the carney guy eventually calls him a freak, and he puts his like he's like pointing at him like
He
angrily, and he's
pushes into his chest like, "Get out of here, buddy. Take a
yeah.
walk."
And
Yeah.
so like Darkman goes crazy and breaks that guy's finger, and there's an amazing shot where the guy's screaming, and then it snap pans to Julie, and she's screaming, and it snap pans to Darkman, and he's screaming.
Yeah, just everyone. And then he's like, and then he just goes and grabs the elephant. And he's like, "Take it." And she's like,
No,
"No,
he goes, yeah,
take
go
the
ahead.
fucking elephant."
Yeah, he
Just
goes, take the
shoves it
fucking
at.
elephant. And he still does it in his Darkman voice. It's not even trying to hide it. And then his face starts to melt off because it's been 91
I
days.
know he cuts it so close, and then he's
So,
running and
by the way,
smoking. Yeah,
he wasn't even like ready to leave, even though he was clearly minutes away from like losing his time.
I know.
And so he covers it and he runs off, and that's where Julie finds out where he's been living. And she tells him, like, she finds out that he's more damaged than she knows. And she's
Why didn't you tell me, Kate? You should have told me.
And then that's when they find out that he's still alive. So then they realize that the best way to get to him is through Julie. Julie has been kidnapped by the CEO. What's the CEO's name, Josh? Do you remember?
Strack, and you know what I love about the CEO, by the way, is
That he
um,
looks exactly like Elon Musk.
yeah, I mean he's a textbook evil CEO, and they're gonna basically bring Julie to a construction site to throw her off. I don't know how they plan to kill Julie, but they do at this construction site.
But this guy is so interesting because of how much he loves being evil. Or like,
Yeah,
and he doesn't even really see himself as evil. He's kind of like a little bit like Peyton, where he's like, yeah, I mean, if I have to kill someone to get this fucking,
yeah.
he even tells
He
Peyton at
says
one
like
point,
you destroy out of revenge. I only destroy to create better things. Like because he thinks
yeah,
he's like
exactly.
saving the city. Yeah, which I'm sure
Sound
Elon Musk thinks too.
familiar?
Yeah.
Elon Musk, who I
It,
know listens.
he,
And so then he puts on a mask that looks very familiar if you love Sam Raimi and you listened to us earlier when we said Bruce Campbell shows up. And at the end, he gives like his speech. It's basically his motto where he's like,
I'm everyone and no one. Everywhere. Nowhere. Call me Darkman.
which again, I don't know why he's calling himself Darkman because he's never in the dark. Even that scene is in the daytime. The
yeah.
only scene that's at night with Darkman, he's not even trying to wear a mask. And I like again, like that speech, I didn't have to read it. I just memorized it from watching this movie so much. But yeah, Darkman is amazing. Honestly, if the effects looked even worse, I wouldn't care because it's so stylized and good that like it adds to the film that I would much rather have those shots than like, oh, it looks real, but who gives a shit? And
Yeah,
I
no,
do
I would
think
agree. Yeah.
And I mean, it's 100% a comic book movie, but I do like that. Like, it does deal with themes of like corporate oversight, and at what point, like, who's the more evil person? Darkman who's killing people openly, or this guy who's like, oh, I'm not really killing people, but if people die, who cares? You know, like which one? Like
Yeah.
Darkman is constantly at odds with him getting revenge, even though he is stopping quote unquote bad people,
Yeah,
but
there
the
is
other guy
something.
isn't.
It's kind of funny. Like most superhero movies, either the hero doesn't kill, and that's like a big thing, like Batman, or
Yeah,
in like a Marvel movie, like Tony Stark has killed like hundreds of people at this point, but it's glossed over as like, they were bad guys, and he shot a missile. Like, who gives a shit? And it's very like this is the first time it's like a comic book movie acknowledging the kind of like you'd have to mentally embrace that you kill people now, even if you think it's for a good reason, and it would like alter your personality like severely, and
yeah,
it's interesting that they did this in 1990 and like no superhero movies even touched that idea since.
yeah, and it is kind of crazy. Like the last movie, I think even try to come close is funny enough because it's Spider-Man, the new one. And it's funny because Spider-Man is the teen, so you'd think he'd be the least one to affect with or to deal with consequences of his actions. But like yeah, like because if you think about it in real life, there's no way a superhero could have any kind of relationship with like a normal woman without like putting her constantly at risk. And like even in this movie that's very silly, I do like that they have themes of like, how corporate America is like screwing us over, like the viciousness of it, and like how the police are so easily bought, and how easy it is to go from being a lawyer for a high price company to going to being someone who could easily disappear. And I think that those are interesting ideas. And even like, I mean, they do kind of treat it with like a little bit of outlandish exploitation, but even the way that like people dismiss Darkman because of his mental illness and because of his proclivity to kill. You know what I'm like? I mean, it's silly that he's killing people, so I understand why people don't want to be around Darkman. But like that opening scene where they're like, "Yeah, this guy is in pain all the time." So we didn't really treat him. We just took away way for him to get pain, and he is gonna
we
go crazy. But like America,
Yeah, like we severed his nerves, so problem solved pretty much.
yeah, we severed his, and then they're like, "Oh, there is side effects. Like he's gonna go crazy," and it's like that's not a good side effect to even try.
There is a very funny this is like a one-off, and it's one of those things where it's like, I don't know if it's meant to be a joke, but whenever she's at the funeral, but she's the only one there. I guess he didn't have any friends. But the guy, like the guy's talking to the gravedigger. He's like, "Oh, put one in the ground, huh?" And he's like, "Easiest job ever. All they found of that guy was an ear." It's like, I assume they still made you bury a full-size coffin, not an ear-size coffin.
Yeah, in this world, I assume that they would bury an air-sized coffin.
That is true. Yeah.
Um, yeah, that is and I think that that's so funny, especially like when compared to modern cinema where like everyone's kind of just a boring person or a cameo. It is funny to like go back to these type of movies and it's like, oh, everyone in this movie is an interesting, like from his lab assistant to the carnival worker to like some of the people that they run into for no real reason. It's just like everyone is like they've put some effort into making everyone recognizable, and I think that's one of Sam Raimi's
They do
gifts, and it's so
the
amazing.
the Hispanic gang member is
Oh
always
yeah,
yelling. He's
we got some representation.
he's got like the
He
mustache and
says,
the long hair.
he says, "Chinga tu madre, where are
Yeah.
you?"
Yeah.
And that is his voice, guys. That's not me making a voice
Yeah, what point he's like, Dios mío, there's two of them. Who do I shoot? Yeah.
Tells me there's two of them, and like, yeah, it's so funny. I love that guy. And again, he doesn't have a name, but we do know a lot about him just based on how. And even like the convenience store worker that Durant supposedly robs from, he's like, "Hey, buddy, hey, I'm your friend, buddy." And then like Darkman as Durant goes, "I'm not your buddy. My name's Durant." And it's like you didn't have to do any of this, but I'm glad you did. And so I think it's like it just. I mean, it just shows like the difference between when you have someone like Sam Raimi and how important he makes every role feel. as opposed to like, and I'm not even gonna say as opposed to anything. I'm just gonna say that that's a great like thing to do, and I think that more movies should do it.
The only, you know what, actually, the one of the only, the few superhero movies I could say this reminds me of from the modern day is Venom, Let There Be Carnage. Because it has the
Yes,
same kind
yes,
of like, oh, like you're allowed to have a style. And it's a tight 90 minutes, perfect length
yeah,
for a comic book film.
yeah. Good job. I mean, we've talked about how much we love Venom, but we are the Venom podcast. How good is the music in this movie? It's
Oh,
Danny
man.
Elfman.
It is very, again, shades of what he would eventually, like the Spider Man
Yeah.
music later on. It has a
It's
very
such a
similar
good
score.
theme. Yeah, and
Yeah.
they keep doing they keep like the whole score is just basically the theme again and again, but it's so good that you like it's so cool to hear and to like every time it comes on you're like fuck yeah, it's Darkman time. But let's go into some of the trivia because I think like Sam Raimi, like some of these films, like from back then, they were so like the way studios used to be was so crazy that the trivia is always hilarious. Like Bill Paxton, the late great Bill Paxton from our Twister episode and every good movie ever made, was almost cast as Peyton, but then he told his friend Liam Neeson to audition, and Liam Neeson got the role, and then Paxton didn't speak to him for months.
Oh, man. He would have done great in it, but I do kind of like the manic energy of Liam Neeson in this.
I think Liam Neeson kind of because Liam Neeson is imposing just because he's so tall, and like Bill Paxton, like you always want to give him a hug.
He's very happy go lucky. Yeah.
Yeah, and it, like that's his thing is that you root for him regardless, and I think he would have brought a very different feel to the role. Liam Neeson had to do 18-hour days because he was in 10-piece makeup, but he said he liked it and he loved putting on the Darkman makeup, which if you ever had that like part of makeup, it's annoying as hell. And also one of the hardest part was him speaking with the false teeth, and I wonder if that was like unintentionally the reason that every time he laughs his teeth chatter, because I feel like his false teeth are kind of coming out and it's
Yeah, they're
creating that
definitely
effect.
jutting a bit, but I kind of like
Yeah,
that. You know,
but it kind of
it's, yeah.
adds to how creepy he looks. Yeah. And then, of course, one of the funny things that you never really think about is that Sam Raimi is really good friends with the Coen brothers. And they not only helped him with some of the shots, but they also helped him do some uncredited doctoring on the script, which makes like it's funny because of how different Sam Raimi's movies and the Coen brothers movies are on the surface. But if you look at the writing, especially, and the camera work, they have very similar like senses of humor and the
They're
way
like
they want to.
funny in the same, and that's kind of funny too. It's especially with like the serious Coen Brothers movie where it crops up. Like you could totally see hints of it in No Country for Old Men and stuff like that. Like funny scenes and stuff. So
Yeah. Also, the studio editor had such a bad time trying to make Sam Raimi happy that he had a nervous breakdown and left. Because, like, imagine like trying to edit a Sam Raimi film, and he's like, "Oh yeah, in this scene, I want you to replace the background with like fire." And then,
it's like, okay, no, but it shouldn't just fade away. Lightning bolt should shatter that part of the background and then spin into like a vertigo hypnosis sign. That's on fire. Yeah.
yeah. Gary Oldman also could have played it, which again would have been very different. This was a, like Josh said, this is the very first work between Danny Elfman and Sam Raimi, and then they would obviously go on to do Spider Man. Julia Roberts almost got the role, which is Coolio.
So this was a strange one because I know Frances McDormand. I've never seen her in kind of this very like straightforward. Oh, she's the girlfriend of the hero role. It's kind of interesting as like a one-off thing for her, you know.
Yeah, she usually plays, and it's not that this character isn't complex, but it's very much like she makes the character her own, and she makes it into less than a damsel in distress. But in anyone else's hands, it could have easily been the damsel in distress because a lot of times she gets kidnapped, but her character has so much like integrity and characterization that you never feel like that's her only purpose.
Yeah, no, she definitely like kind of like elevates it a little bit for sure.
Yeah. Um. Oh man, they wanted James Caan for Lewis Stack. That would have been crazy.
James Caan,
Yeah.
that would have been great.
And then, of course, his car shows up, which apparently The Coen brothers are the ones driving his car. That's
Oh,
crazy.
which scene is his car in?
I don't know.
Maybe it's the scene where Ted Raimi gets his head driven
Yeah, I
off.
think so.
It would have to be. I was on the lookout for it, but I didn't spot it. But
Apparently this got one of the worst one of the worst test screenings in the history of Universal. Oh, but then they added Danny Elfman's score and it completely changed the
mm,
rating. That's amazing because the
I
score does add so much.
I do wonder what the score was like for the first time around. Then it
I
was
know. I
just
bet you they just use generic stuff.
now. You've seen the sequels.
I have seen the sequels. They are just kind of bad. One of them, Durant Returns, which
It's
doesn't make
called
any sense.
Darkman 2: The Return of
And
Durant.
then
I've
the
never
third
seen
one's
it,
called Darkman 3 Die, Darkman Die,
which
which is
is a
hilarious.
goat title for a third
Yeah.
film. Yeah.
That's what I'm going to name the sequel to Last Ones. It's going to be called Last Ones 2 Die, Darkman Die. I'm just going to add it to every. It's like your movie, you're doing a Star Wars movie, but you're calling it
I,
Die, Darkman Die?
I feel like you could make the case that Borderlands takes place in the same universe as
It
Darkman.
kind of does. That's what El
So,
Paso is, and it's in the Darkman universe. Um, yeah. I don't remember anything other than Arnold Veloso plays the Darkman, and this was before the Mummy, of course. And I didn't. I reckon like it's so funny. I'm probably the only person who watched the Mummy, and I was like, "Hey, it's Darkman."
right, yeah.
But and there's always been rumblings of them wanting to redo the character, but as so far nothing's been touched. And I think this movie's so good that like a sequel would be good, but I'm at the point where it's so unique and amazing that I think can't really top it.
Yeah,
I think it's good.
I think of all the movies I love that they did remakes of that were just super forgettable, and I'm like, it would just be that. So
Yeah,
maybe
and
don't do it. Yeah.
I think about like I read a lot of Darkman comics because for a while he did comics, and one of them he like meets Ash from The Evil Dead, and it doesn't really work. Like you can't fight deadites with the mask.
right.
And like Darkman doesn't know how to kill people with guns. He only knows how to beat them to death. So like he doesn't really work in the Army of Darkness universe, to be honest. But he's had a pretty good shelf life. He's still recognizable. But I would suggest if you haven't seen Darkman, we didn't spoil enough of it, and probably on the YouTube we spoiled even less. So I would suggest going to watch it. This is more of a hey guys, watch this fucking movie because it's so cool
Yeah,
that you'll want to watch it. And it is one of those. I mean, it's rated
it's a
R, but
gem.
it's mostly language and violence. It's no sexual content, so bring the kids. Um, and yeah, great movie. Good job, Sam Raimi. I think you have a bright future ahead of you. Definitely at least four Spider-Mans. Um, and guys, next week, I don't know what we're doing. I think we're doing. Oh, we might bring a special guest on. Who knows? But if you guys like this, give us a like and a subscribe. And if you didn't like it, like and subscribe us. Maybe we'll do better next time. You'll never know. If PewDiePie can have 100 million subscribers, I can at least get 50. Um, we'll see you guys. Oh, and apparently my short film, Freddy Krueger, should be coming out any week now. We'll give you more information as it comes out. It's a fun spoof short film, but it's very much worth your time because it's only worth 5 minutes, and you waste 5 minutes on a bunch of dumber shit than this. So waste it on mine.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, stop reading like the Wikipedia article for like I don't know what Spider-Man was up to, in the
yes,
70s.
stop
Yeah.
reading what's going on in Euphoria. Nobody knows, including Sam Levinson.
yeah.
And check out this short for 3.5 minutes. And until we meet again, we'll see you guys on the Bomb Squad. Bombing it up in the. So, Josh, I think we're ready to leave.
Are you going to hit stop recording?
Unless.
Ugh,
Unless, Josh.
I don't think there's no one left.